what I'm hoping to do today is I have some pages here on research that we did about the size of the market, the adoption. Hopefully that will ring a chord for you and you might have some interesting questions. I've also got some stories for you, from our client work. So I lead the GenAI practice for BCG globally across our tech, media, and telco clients. I end up serving clients personally as well, along with many of my colleagues. And so I've pulled together some stories out here of real client stories. I'll be able to share those names as well. And I'm hoping that that is actually probably the more interesting part than the research, which I'm sure you all are inundated with. So with that, let's jump into it. Let me just make sure I can operate this right. There we go. One would have you believe that the world tomorrow is going to all be run with agents, and we all are going to be off on a beach sipping a beverage of our choice, right? No more toil, just joy. I do think the only key takeaway over here is a change is afoot. The change is possibly bigger than what we think it is going to be, even though, right now, I do suspect we all are also feeling a lot of agentic fatigue because, we're just I don't know about you, but I'm certainly inundated with it. I suspect you all are feeling the same. But it is big. There is a massive change and it is coming. That much is undeniable. I think it's a little hard to predict exactly how much that change will be. My best analogy that I've think makes sense for me is if you think back to the invention of the steam engine, it was a pretty revolutionary invention, set off a lot of the industrial revolution, but the true change didn't actually manifest itself at industrial scale across the globe until all the factories and other manufacturing facilities had time to retool all of their processes and train people. People didn't understand everything else that needed to go around it. This feels a little bit like that, and you'll see that as a theme across my talk. So these are, in my mind, early signals, at best. I'm going to skip over this because Raj did such a good job telling us. But for what it's worth, LLMs have done a great job, sort of synthesizing information, summarizing it, searching it, those kinds of things. But when you think about the average business process that has a lot of human actions sprinkled through it, we're taking decisions, we're optimizing, we're accessing different types of data sources, actions are being taken, approvals are being granted, bills are getting paid, or supply chain decisions are getting made. And so in order to really think about Eric Schmidt's forecast, for example, all these business products are going to be run by agents, you really need more than just the synthesis and the summarization and the sort of media creation skills of LLMs. You've got to marry that up with actioning, reasoning, optimization, decision-making. And so in a nutshell, agents of all sizes, shapes, and flavors, autonomous or not, basically bring that set of capabilities. Of course, it's a family, so you've got lots of different types of agents, as Raj did walk us through that. But that, in essence, is what it is. And that's what makes it so powerful, allowing agents to sort of be colleagues, if you will, agentic colleagues of humans, because now they're able to make decisions, optimize, conduct actions, and so on and so forth. I just said all of that, so we're going to skip through this. And I think this was exactly what Raj said as well. So there are different types of automation technologies, different levels of autonomous operations. And so, there is a level of reality on where we are today. And, we're not yet there at the full autonomous level, but also there is one really important thing that I wish to, we had to work a little bit on this is we're all very familiar with automation. You take a process, we make a series of decisions, it's well known in advance, and it's very easy to take a set of those business rules and just automate it. that is actually not a good candidate for agentification, if I may say so, right? A lot of people are conflating automation and agentification, but they're not. The whole point of using an agent is when there is a business process which actually is not easily automated. Perhaps it needs to access different types of data. Perhaps decisions differ based on the situation and the context, right? And I'll give some examples of this. At that point, automation actually could become a hairy mess because you're probably needing to do 55 different types of automation for that process. But one agent with the capacity to be able to look at those factors and constraints and then be able to make that decision is probably a better out. So even as you think about, these are complementary technologies, not exactly generational. We keep going. I'm going to go past this. I think you might have access to the pages here. These are all just examples. I'll stay here for a second. And again, Raj had shown us a picture of what your future org chart is going to look like, right? I think one way to think about that, in any typical enterprise, you have a lot of different systems of record, where your data is sitting. Much of this is, there's some legacy, there's some modern systems, there's CRM, databases, and you typically have a lot of human workers who are accessing these systems, carrying out these different business processes, and then making decisions. They might be doing a customer service, they might be sending an invoice, they might be completing a sale, etc. The notion is that as agents increase in their sophistication, they're able to conduct a bunch of these operations, interfacing with these systems, which then makes the human's job easier. Ergo, the human is orchestrating across these agents. So you almost, I'm gonna bring back a really hated term from the previous decade, which was middleware, right? But I'm doing this just for the ease of understanding, is that you almost could think of sort of a very modern, sleek way in which agents might perform as middleware to be able to cut across the complexity that sits in enterprises today, to be able to access all of that data, get you what you need so that your, let's say, a customer service operations agent who's dealing with, let's say, a really frustrated customer who's had service disruptions, network quality issues in a telco, and you have these agents who are able to go to the root of the issue in the context of the customer's particular service disruption, be able to get all that information out and come up with a resolution based on what that customer has valued. And so, there's a layer there that has performed a useful function, allowing the human agent to then, complete the loop with the human relationship with the customer in a way that gets them a performance improvement, right? Gets them a better outcome. And so again, it's not really middleware, but I found it useful to think about it in that way. And hence you get into this concept of mixed teams. I'm sure many of you saw Workday's announcement, about a month ago, in their earnings release, and they talked about, in addition to now having software to help manage HR operations across your employees, your human employees, they're also launching now a platform to basically manage your agents, and I thought that was funny, but it's true. And the reason for it kind of comes back to this, where you're now having these mixed teams, if you will, with agents and humans. Do we have an older version? Sorry. Okay, I apologize for the yellow sticky on that. Do we want to check the version? Pardon 1 second. So while they're doing that, the Agentic, so BCG did a bunch of surveys, across a very wide population of C-suite and leadership roles across tech and AI organizations across a whole swath of industry. So this is industry agnostic. It was a global survey. And what we found was that agentic enthusiasm, so, just like you all raised your hands here in the audience, is very prevalent uniformly across geographies. So, it's across the stages of exploring, running some pilots, and even in production grade, there's a lot of enthusiasm. And of course, we've seen that grow through GenAI, and now it's the agentic incarnation, if you will. When they bring back the page, though, there's an interesting curve. However, what's interesting to observe, though, is that despite the widespread experimentation, there is a huge gap to value realization. This is the quintessential million-dollar question, which is that you truly have less than 4% of the companies that we surveyed that have actually claimed that even according to their self-defined criteria reach scale, if you define it as greater than 5 use cases, greater than 2 business units, in any shape or form. Most of the others are exploring. And the key question keeps coming back, so is why? Two things. Why is that? And secondly, what is it that winners are doing or the leaders are doing differently that are actually allowing them to get to that, and what kind of outcomes are they experiencing, right? So I'm just going to run ahead and talk to you while they get the pages back up. It may not be in exactly the same order, but a few things that the leaders are doing, right? One is we've categorized in BCG, there are 3 types of applications of AI, if you will, three ways in which you could broadly use AI in your enterprise. And we call that deploy, reshape, and invent. And let me explain what that means. Deploy is basically the application of AI for productivity improvements. That could be, you turn on Microsoft Copilot, you turn on, it comes usually through most of your SaaS providers by turning on the AI mode of operations, and you're now empowering your entire employee base to essentially turbocharge their productivity. You want to be able to deploy all of those ready-made tools and get that productivity improvement. Reshape is getting to a little bit of what Raj started talking about, which is you've got a number of processes in your enterprise, and not only do you want to automate them to get whatever cost savings that you want, but now you can actually start to reshape or reimagine them, right? You think about, we worked on marketing workflow redesign for a global pharma company, right? This is one of my favorite examples. Think about a pharmaceutical company, they're launching global campaigns, they're doing a lot of language translation work, they've got agency design work, content creation, campaign creation, et cetera, et cetera. And so, in addition to taking each step of the existing workflow, whether it's happening outsourced or in-house in the enterprise, and saying, how can AI give me, 30% savings in this portion of the workflow? What it turns out is by the time you apply AI end-to-end and reimagine the process from the ground up, because the economics of different pieces of the workflow changed, or what's possible is now different, you can actually redesign it differently. You may not be sending work outside to an agency. Perhaps you may take it in-house, or perhaps, you do away with your translation piece, of the workflow. And so by the time you redesign, there was an end-to-end, not only was there a 30% savings, but, there was a time to market for the types of these very complex campaigns and the focus groups and all these things that the company was doing, so dramatically different. And so we see that across HR workflows, finance workflows, you name it, marketing, certainly customer service operations, which I think has been the very first one to be very, very, deeply reimagined. And so that's Reshape. I would say a good, more than half of the client work that BCG is doing, bread and butter in AI, is right now reshaping. Because as you can imagine, the risk profile of this is considered a little bit lower. It's internal operations. It has a clear business case associated with it. And it's a great learning playground for all the tools and the ecosystem, right? So that's where we see a lot of activity. And the third one is invent, which is really where we see the disruption and a lot of movement growth. When you talk about growth, how are you serving customers differently? Think about your own value chain as an enterprise. What adjacencies now became possible for you to take on? Because again, economics are changing. Maybe it's possible for you to go after data sources that previously weren't economical to do so. Maybe you can reach customers differently. You can address new segments of the market that previously were not reachable. And so a year ago, we weren't seeing a lot, but here now we have many, many more companies now willing to take steps. We worked with L'Oreal, for example, right? And this is one of my favorite stories. I've got a visual about it later on, but very well-known brand, $45 billion in revenue. And we worked with them to use AI to design something called Beauty Genius, which was a direct-to-consumer offering. Think about the global scale and reach of this. And so what Beauty Genius does is basically, you look at you can use your mobile phone as a customer. You say, this is me. So obviously, there's a vision-based AI to look at your skin tone and, all of your other features and say, I'm looking for recommendations. What kind of toner should I use, or what kind of, hair product should I use? What would look good? And so you have this AI that's now offering such a massive level of personalization. And think about the scale of this, millions and millions. And L'Oreal actually spoke about this at the opening of the CES conference earlier this year. So that's a great example of something that was just not uniformly and economically possible until AI came along. And that's a deep sort of, how you market to customers and how you support your product with and how you interact with your customer. It's those kinds of disruptions. There's another one in financial services as well, but I think you get the general idea. We'll come back to some more of the stories. Why do I say this? Because the value creation potential of each of these three is different. And it's also interesting to see which of the more mature companies, where they're putting their dollars. And so let me just move ahead here. Hang on. Okay. I was hoping to see the, anyway, the, sorry, our PowerPoint isn't exactly perfect, but that's okay. The key message that I would basically want you to know is that most of the leaders in mature companies are basically spending a disproportionate amount of their dollars. Close to 60% of their initiatives are focused on reshaping and reinventing rather than deploying, versus those who are earlier in their maturity curve are disproportionately still in the deployment stage. And that makes a total amount of sense if you think about it, is that, the easiest way for you to get started on your AI journey is to deploy the Microsoft tools, for example, if you have Microsoft Office, right? Speaking of agents, though, we talked about reshaping of core functions. There's a very, very rich landscape of core functions that are available to be able to reshape. And this is roughly, just a sampling of verticals and the types of use cases that we're seeing getting, subject to basically AI-based reimagination, right? And this is my point on the fact that most companies yet aren't. So that's one point on what separates the leaders in AI from those that aren't yet. So let me give you another example here. This is from financial services. So this is a very, very large Asian bank. It's about $15 billion in revenue. They have a very large, they have $80 billion assets under management with, and they embarked on a fairly widespread AI transformation with the C-suite sponsorship, right? So the key point over here is they decided to apply this agentic agents in basically their wealth management and wealth advisory services. And so even think about it, you have wealth advisors who are both selling as well as advising. And you can imagine the wealth of information that they have to go access, whether it's the history of the customer, the different assets they have, the performance of the different assets, their proprietary notes on it. And so it started off as a simple RAG-based chatbot, but over the space of, and this has been now a 2.5-year transformation, I want to say, it has evolved into the buildup of very specific agents. So everything that Raj talked about, when you think about it, and these are not yet autonomous because they still have the human in the loop with the final approval, et cetera, coming, so the agents cannot make investment decisions, right? They can suggest, they can recommend, but the approval still needs to be given by the human in the loop. And that's the process designed to be set up in such a way that, it's not going rogue essentially. And so there was a large amount of process design as to where exactly agents would come in to speed up or to provide less errors and better outcomes, but yet have human in the loop. And then you have agents. So then various agents were designed, for example, being able to analyze a portfolio performance over a particular period of time, look and benchmark across different types of comparable categories, and therefore offer recommendations. This is actually a fairly complex set of agents, different tasks, all then being brought together with an orchestration engine. In this particular case, the work started 2.5 years ago. The client did build everything custom. So, they used a lot of open source. So everything that Raj told us was going to be very difficult to do. And the reason I say this is because I think it matters when you started your journey. 2.5 years ago, the state of play in the market was different. There were less off-the-shelf tools available than there are today, especially for, this was obviously a very regulated entity with highly proprietary data, very bespoke workflows. I think today there are many more choices in the world available to be able to do this kind of work. And then they've also spent a lot of time training their wealth advisors, because now so much time in their day has been freed up. How exactly are they repurposing? How do they interact with these agents? How do they, sort of validate those outputs, first of all, because, there always is the need to do that. How do they use it to develop further human relationships with the customers, right? So there's been a lot of training. Also, adoption is never a straight line. It's never about just giving a tool and then expecting your human community to use it. There's a lot of barriers. We find, I'll say this in brief, we find often that there are cohorts. Any given population subdivides into cohorts. And so you have the early adopters who are very keen, and then you have others who read about it, who tried a couple of times, and then it plateaus, they don't take it up. And you have to design specific interventions based on the cohort and the factors that may be blocking their adoptions, right? So these are all the kinds of things, which is why it takes, those number of years to get to something like this. We already talked about Beauty Genius, so I'm going to keep going. Somebody please keep me honest on time. I think we're almost there. Yeah, I'm almost done. And maybe one last story here, just to give you an idea of the breadth of applications that are real world, and also to inspire you, hopefully, in each of your respective situations. So this one's a US renewable energy company, which is one of the largest operator of windmills, right? So large, complex pieces of equipment. Again, downtime is not good, right? It immediately is causing sort of loss of revenue, et cetera, right? And so, but also very specialized pieces of equipment. And so the goal here is, how do you make sure that across your maintenance worker population, if you will, how do you make them really productive? How do you on-ramp new joiners? How do you make them as productive as the most experienced ones? How do you help them address a vast variety of situations? It's a new piece of equipment. How do they recognize if it's what the problem statements could be? And so again, this is about slowly growing over time. Again, a couple of years of transformation here. The main steps were going from a RAG-based application that is simply querying a maintenance manual, It's like, hey, what might be causing this stoppage? Again, I'm certainly not a maintenance technician, but you get the idea, right? A RAG-based application that's just simple Q&A for the maintenance workers, all the way to now being able to be integrated into procurement systems and saying if the bolt is broken, being able to go in and place an order immediately for a bolt. I'm going to go ahead and order that, and here's an interim fix, right? And so getting to a greater and greater degree of sophistication in that workflow with the right evaluation procedures, right? And then the dual path with that was upskilling these maintenance technicians, right? That's always another work stream as well. But if you look at the impact statement, this was actually, very, very impressive with, it was a trial first with, and even the trial had hundreds of these engineers, and now it's been rolled out all across North America, right? So it just gives you an idea. We've covered retail, consumer goods, banking, and now industrial goods as well, right? It's very, very broad-based, this movement. So I'll leave with a couple of parting thoughts here. We've talked a lot about the people and the upskilling. I want to talk a little bit about metrics. So as you think about taking pilots up to production grade, it's really important to think about metrics that need to get tracked. We've shared some examples here in the stories, and it's important to note that a lot of them don't, or take it for granted that the impact will just show up, but you'd be amazed, And so needless to say, tracking top and bottom line impact in the KPI creation, which then sums up for us across agents. There is a lot of complexity. We've talked a little bit today. We've touched on, across the talks you've heard, from Shailesh, from Raj as well, that there is a lot of complexity. The ecosystem's very complex. There is real fatigue. And so how do you cut through all of that to keep it simple? How do you design these evaluation systems that are going to help you come up with truly useful agentification, if you will, that's net additive to your process? How do you manage the risk of introducing complexity, having your workers, your employees engaged in the co-creation, in the process with the right kind of governance, right? Those are all important. And we started with this, so I'm going to skip over it. We talked about the human AI agent teams, right? So increasingly, whether it's the wealth advisor in the bank who is now orchestrating all the agents who are going back and forth on the process, whether it's your maintenance technician who's orchestrating AI agents who are going back and forth across the maintenance process, digging up information, ordering parts, that's really, so think about even the nature of your entry-level job now changed to a supervisory job. It has profound implications for how you hire, what kind of skill sets you're looking for, and how humans work. No longer are you off in an island just doing your sort of white collar work anymore. We haven't touched at all, but these are all issues, is IT costs as a part of P&L, as a fraction of P&L increase. We found in a separate piece of research that they almost are slated to double as you reduce other types of SG&A. So FinOps becomes a very important capability. I'll just leave it at that in terms of key points to note. But it comes with, again, what Raj said right at the very beginning, right? Faster decision times, more growth, better customer service. I think I'm almost done here. And we talked about this, the importance of people and process, not just the technology, because once you even deploy the technology, you've got to get people to adopt it. You've got to redesign your processes. And this is actually, it's not a depressing statistic, it's just a reality. There's still a long, long, long way to go in upskilling and training as you think about how you roll these things out. And I'm sure, Shailesh would also have a lot of war stories from Morgan Stanley about that. So I would say we are still in the very starting phases of these journeys. And as you plan transformations, we need to think about it very holistically. And then we're done, actually. There's some rules on driving adoption. And then, as you think about the transformation, think holistically. If I was to leave you with one word at the end, prioritize, get the right talent, think about adoption and training, think about metrics to measure the success of your experiments, pick your ecosystem, again, as Raj said and Sailesh said, and then get going and know that it's imperfect and it's iterative. That's what I would say. Thank you.